I stayed completely silent through her 20-minute tirade. All I did was open the property survey and watch as 47 homeowners slowly realized they'd been driving on my private road for free. Picture the scene: Ho President Patty at the podium, waving around an invoice for $70,000 in so-called unauthorized road work, warning 60 neighbors that I was lowering their property values. She had it all: slideshows, bogus engineering reports, and even 3 lawyers lined up to scare me into caving. For 6 straight months, she made my life miserable, measuring the length of my grass with an actual ruler, ticketing me because my daughter's car was supposedly illegally parked in my own driveway, and even threatening to have my home condemned for repairing hazardous potholes with my own money. What Patty hadn't realized, though, was that every luxury car in that parking lot had driven across my land to get there. The very road she was making a spectacle about, I inherited it from my uncle, the man who developed the whole neighborhood. So let me ask, what would you do if your hoa fined you for fixing your own property? Share your wildest neighbor story in the comments, because I bet you've got one. Let me rewind a little and introduce myself. My name's Jake Morrison, I'm 52, a retired civil engineer, and I honestly thought I'd found the perfect, quiet place to rebuild after a painful divorce that left me rethinking everything. Back in 2019, I bought a modest ranch home in Willowbrook Estates. The perks were clear: a decent school district for my teenage daughter Emma's weekend visits, tree-lined streets, and an HOA that, at the time, actually seemed reasonable. Willowbrook Estates had the vibe of a suburban time capsule: 47 houses from the 80s and 90s, all connected to the outside world by one winding road called Maple Grove Lane. When I first moved in, most of the residents were original owners, middle-class families who'd raised their kids there and still knew their neighbors' names. But gentrification soon crept in like vines on a fence. Tech employees and real estate investors swooped in, replaced gardens with security systems, and turned friendly driveway hellos into constant tattling on the Nextdoor app. And then came Patricia Hendress. Everyone called her Patty, though sweet she was not. Think more parking ticket with lipstick. At 48, she was a real estate agent with a pearl white BMW she parked at the exact same angle every day. Yoga pants, oversized sunglasses indoors, she always looked like she was heading to some imaginary VIP meeting. Patty moved in around 2020 and immediately self-appointed as neighborhood standards coordinator. This was a woman who literally used a ruler to check grass height. Her husband Richard, a tax attorney, mostly kept his head down, often apologizing for her behavior. No kids. Plenty of time for micromanaging everyone else. The real trouble started in spring 2024. A brutal winter had left Maple Grove Lane looking like a lunar surface, potholes deep enough to swallow a small dog, sections of asphalt completely disintegrated. Cars scraping the pavement became our daily soundtrack. As an engineer, I knew the damage would only escalate. I sent the HOA board a polite email offering to arrange proper repairs. Patty's reply landed within the hour: all modifications require board approval and permits. 6 weeks passed. No meetings. No action. Meanwhile, the road worsened. Mrs. Chen, the sweet 78-year-old 3 houses down, nearly stumbled into a pothole while getting her mail. That was the breaking point. I called my contractor friend Tom, the guy perpetually smelling of diesel and coffee, and we spent a weekend patching the worst sections correctly, using quality materials and proper prep. It cost me $3,200 out of pocket, but at least cars could drive safely again. The neighbors were instantly relieved. Some even offered to chip in. I shared before and after photos in our neighborhood Facebook group, hoping it would push the board to finally deal with the road properly. That turned out to be my first big mistake. Within 48 hours, the first real sign of trouble came in the form of a cease and desist letter waiting in my mailbox. At 8 a.m., I heard the sharp thud of certified mail on my porch, a sound that should have warned me of what was coming. Patty accused me of unauthorized infrastructure work and threatened to drag me into court. According to her, my repairs didn't align with HOA aesthetic standards, and she demanded I tear everything out and return it to its original condition. Original condition? You mean the hazardous potholes that could snap an axle? The neighborhood Facebook page lit up like a bonfire. Longtime residents backed me, remembering a time when neighbors pitched in to help one another. The newer, wealthier rivals, though, stood firmly with Patty. Their line: rules are rules. That's when it hit me I'd accidentally sparked a suburban class war. And honestly, the smell of stale coffee at the emergency hall meeting should have been my first clue about the circus ahead. Patty scheduled that emergency board meeting for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, a time guaranteed to keep most working people from attending. Only 3 of the 5 board members bothered to show up, but in Patty's version of democracy, that was plenty for a quorum. I walked into the community center to find Patty staged like she was prosecuting some international tribunal. She had a full-blown PowerPoint titled Neighborhood Infrastructure Violations, a case study, and glossy photos of my roadwork from every possible angle. Red arrows marked each so-called violation. This resident, she sneered, refusing to even use my name, has created severe liability issues and reduced property values through unauthorized repairs. She insisted my work clashed with the community's look, ironic, considering I'd used stronger, better quality materials than the original road. Then came the vote at 3-0 in favor of fining me $500 plus $200 per day until the repairs were professionally removed. Apparently, filling dangerous potholes was now a daily crime in Willowbrook. Here's where I pivoted. Instead of caving, I came back armed with facts. At the next meeting, I presented a professional engineering report, complete with traffic studies, safety data, and material specs. The room was packed with neighbors, most of them sick of dodging craters on their morning commutes. Calmly, I offered to donate the repairs to the hole if they would just approve them retroactively. These upgrades exceed county standards, I said. Patty's counter: she pulled out her own engineering report. The catch: it was written by her brother-in-law. His only certifications were in landscaping, and the report itself was printed on lawn care company letterhead. The audience burst out laughing when I pointed that out, but Patty refused to budge. Instead, she doubled my fine to $1.00 plus $500 a day and introduced a brand new emergency policy requiring that all future work use HO-approved contractors. And wouldn't you know it, the only approved contractor was her husband, Richard's golf buddy, who charged 3 times the going rate. That's when my daughter Emma, 17 and infinitely more tech-savvy than me, stepped in. She helped me design a devastating PowerPoint that exposed the bogus engineering report for what it was. At the next meeting, when we displayed the landscaper's credentials side by side with Patty's claims, you could hear the entire room gasp. By the end of the night, 3 board members resigned out of sheer embarrassment. But Patty wasn't finished. Within 2 weeks, she'd replaced them with wealthy allies who supported her property value protection crusade. They not only upheld my fines, they added fraud investigation costs on top of the bill. That's when it became crystal clear this had nothing to do with potholes. It was about power. About one person with too much free time and a little authority trying to bully me out of the neighborhood for daring to challenge her. Neighbors began approaching me in secret, sharing their own horror stories. Patty had fined people for painting their houses the wrong shade of beige, measured fences with a tape measure, and even cited a retired veteran for leaving his American flag up after sundown. She was drunk on authority, and somehow, I'd become the unwilling symbol of resistance against her suburban fiefdom. Along the way, I discovered something worth sharing. Many HOA letters can require homeowners to post a bond equal to the disputed fines just to contest them. It's a sneaky tactic meant to financially cripple people before they can fight back. If you're ever in this position, look up your state's HOA dispute rules before diving in. It might save you from an expensive surprise. By this stage, my fines had snowballed to $3,000 and were climbing by $500 every single day. The sharp smell of tar from my road repairs was long gone, but every time I drove over those smooth patches I'd paid for, the taste of injustice lingered. What Patty didn't realize was that I'm an engineer. We don't just patch problems, we analyze them, break them down, and solve them systematically. And that's exactly what I was about to do. Something about this entire ordeal felt off, and once an engineer starts poking around property records and legal filings, well, Patty's harassment only intensified. She circled past my house multiple times a day in that white BMW of hers, creeping by like some self-appointed neighborhood detective. The sound of her window sliding down became my personal soundtrack of anxiety. She cited me for grass barely taller than the 3.5-inch limit. Yes, she literally crouched down with a ruler. She fined me because Emma's car was supposedly parked improperly in my own driveway, claiming it was 6 inches over some imaginary boundary line only she could see. She even reported me to the county for unpermitted driveway modifications. Despite the fact I hadn't touched that driveway in half a decade, but I wasn't about to sit back and take it. I installed security cameras and started logging everything. That's when I uncovered the goldmine: selective enforcement. Patty's wealthy friends were committing the same violations: wrong paint colors, oversized mailboxes, cars parked just like Emma's, yet she conveniently overlooked all of them. Naturally, I made a spreadsheet. Engineers love spreadsheets. Line by line, it showed the bias clear as day. Then, one evening, Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with a plate of homemade cookies that smelled like vanilla and quiet defiance. She'd been observing everything and wanted to share her own story. Patty tried to make me dig up my rose garden, she whispered, the one my husband planted 30 years ago, before he passed. She claimed it wasn't a native species and created excess maintenance. Mrs. Chen's hands trembled as she spoke, but then she added, I still have the original HOA documents from when we moved in. Would you like to see them? That was the moment everything shifted. Her late husband had been one of the neighborhood's founding HOA board members, and she still had copies of every covenant, amendment, and meeting minute dating all the way back to 1983. When I spread those papers across my kitchen table, I realized most of Patty's rules had no legal footing at all. The original HOA had been straightforward. Basic guidelines about not letting your lawn turn into a junkyard and keeping the noise down after 10 p.m. All those micromanaging rules about grass height, paint shades, and fence measurements. Added piecemeal over decades, often without proper community votes. Still, I needed to dig deeper. That weekend, I practically lived at the county recorder's office. 10 hours surrounded by the dusty smell of old ledgers and bureaucracy became my new cologne. And that's where I discovered the real bombshell. When the subdivision was built, the developer had kept ownership of certain parcels. Most were sold off over time, but the road, Maple Grove Lane, had a far stranger path. When the developer's company went bankrupt in 1995, its assets were auctioned off to pay creditors. Maple Grove Lane ended up with a holding company I'd never heard of, which later dissolved in 2001. The road then transferred to This Is Where Things Got Juicy Morrison Development LLC. Same name as me. Same name as my Uncle Bob, who'd quietly dabbled in small-scale real estate before he passed in 2018. I raced home and dug into the boxes of files Uncle Bob had left me, the ones I'd been putting off sorting through for years. Buried among the yellowed papers and dusty folders was a deed that had the potential to change everything. Meanwhile, Patty escalated. My fines ballooned to $8,500 and counting, climbing higher by the day. She threatened to slap a lien on my house and even scheduled a so-called neighborhood standards hearing with county officials. Patty's strategy couldn't have been clearer: either bleed me dry with fines until I broke, or push for my property to be condemned. But while she was busy plotting, I stumbled on the biggest holy crap moment of my adult life. Hidden in Uncle Bob's estate papers was a deed for the Maple Grove Lane private roadway easement. Translation: every single car in the subdivision, including Patty's beloved BMW, had been driving over land that I legally owned. Here's a little-known fact that might surprise you: private road easements are nothing like public rights of way. If you hold the deed, you get to control access, set up keep requirements, and even charge fees. That's why it's always smart to research property lines and easements. Many neighborhoods are full of ownership quirks that can flip the balance of power entirely. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the deed in my trembling hands, caught between disbelief and a surge of righteous anger. Patty had been fining me for maintaining my own road. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney to confirm. 2 days later, in an office that smelled faintly of leather books and overpriced coffee, I got the verdict that made my pulse race, Mr. Morrison. You absolutely own that road. The title chain is clean. You've been responsible for it all along, and the HOA has never had jurisdiction. But here's the move I didn't make. I didn't march over to Patty's house and wave the deed in her face. Because I knew she was about to give me something better than a quick win. She was about to destroy herself. Patty hiked my fines up to $25,000 and called an emergency community meeting to address the so-called problem resident. She even invited a local TV crew, convinced the cameras would strengthen her case. The place was packed, 40 neighbors, bright lights, and Channel 7's cameras rolling like it was some small-town congressional hearing. Patty strutted to the front with a 20-minute PowerPoint on community standards, plastering enlarged photos of my repairs on the screen, stamped with the phrase "unauthorized modification." Gesturing toward me like I was a criminal, she declared, "This resident's defiance threatens everyone's property values. We need full community backing for enforcement." I sat quietly in the back, jotting notes, letting her dig her own grave. You could feel the discomfort in the room, neighbors shifting in their plastic chairs, avoiding eye contact, waiting for the spectacle to end. Then came my turn. I asked for the chance to respond. Patty, expecting a groveling apology, smugly granted it. Instead, I calmly walked to the front carrying a folder of documents. I laid out a surveyor's map on the table, the camera's word, and the room fell silent. Before we debate road violations, I said evenly, let's establish who actually owns the road. Patty's face when I displayed the deed was unforgettable, pure disbelief, like someone had just told her Santa was real and suing her for trespassing. I explained how I had inherited the road from my uncle, and that every resident had been using my private property for access. I'd been covering maintenance costs for years while being fined for the privilege. The county official present asked to see the paperwork and confirmed it looked legitimate. The HOA never had authority here, I continued. I've been subsidizing your infrastructure, not violating it. Patty scrambled. She claimed the documents were fake, irrelevant, insisted the HOA still had authority, and even threatened to call for a county fraud investigation. But her eyes gave her away. She knew the game had shifted. The reasonable neighbors got it instantly. Several thanked me for maintaining the road and apologized for staying silent while I was harassed. About 15 of Patty's die-hard supporters walked out with her, but the majority stayed to hear me out. I presented my proposal, a Maple Grove Road Cooperative Agreement. Residents would pay a small monthly fee to fund professional upkeep. I'd retain ownership, but decisions would include community input. Fines and threats would end, and everyone would benefit from a safe, well-kept road. Patty, she wouldn't hear of it. She stormed out, shouting that it wasn't over and threatening to sue me for blackmail. Her loyalists followed, but Mrs. Chen immediately stepped forward to organize an informational meeting for interested neighbors. That same evening, the local news ran the story. The ownership dispute over the road turned into a showcase of private property rights, and the video quickly went viral online. Comments poured in, overwhelmingly siding with me. Patty's threats and erratic behavior looked absurd compared to my calm, fact-based explanation. Here's another key tip that spared me thousands in legal costs. HOA letters cannot enforce liens without an actual court ruling. A lot of their so-called enforcement actions are nothing more than scare tactics meant to bully uninformed homeowners. If your HOA ever threatens a lien, insist on seeing a legitimate court judgment. More often than not, their bark has no legal bite. I gave the neighborhood 1 week to consider my proposal. Within just 3 days, over 20 residents reached out to express interest. Mrs. Chen scheduled an informational meeting about forming a road cooperative, while Patty scrambled to hold her own rally with her dwindling circle of supporters. The conflict had drawn its battle lines, but for the first time since the saga began, the leverage was in my hands. But owning the road wasn't the real bombshell. When I spread Uncle Bob's estate files across my dining table like a property sleuth, I found something far bigger. The road was just one piece. Uncle Bob's company, Morrison Development LLC, had actually developed the entire Willowbrook Estate subdivision back in the late 1980s. Every lot, every easement, Every carefully designed curve he had created the blueprint for the entire neighborhood. The road wasn't just private, it had been purposely designed as a private access route to boost property values. Uncle Bob had retained ownership not by accident, but deliberately, partly to control quality, partly to shield himself from liability. My attorney laid it out plainly. My ownership meant I could dictate access, set conditions, and even charge fees for its upkeep. The only limitation was that I couldn't abruptly cut off existing homeowners without reasonable notice. In practical terms, my authority over the property was almost absolute. And the financial reality floored me. Over 3 decades, the cost of maintaining that road had exceeded $180,000. My own recent $32,000 repair project had boosted property values by an estimated $15,000 per home. With 47 houses in the subdivision, that meant a collective benefit of over $700,000 directly tied to work I had paid for out of pocket. Mrs. Chen gave me the history that tied it all together. In the early days, the Hoa had been cooperatives, centered on community upkeep and good neighbor relations. Uncle Bob used to coordinate road projects through whole meetings, and everyone chipped in fairly. "Your uncle was a good man, Mrs. Chen told me as we shared jasmine tea. He never made anyone feel indebted, even though legally they were. Patty's regime," she explained, "was nothing but a hostile takeover of what had once been a true community." That's when the light bulb clicked. I'd been thinking about this backwards. I wasn't simply a resident subject to whole road rules. I was the property owner, and the whole was trying to regulate an asset that its members relied on. Those 47 homes depended entirely on my private road, and I'd been too polite to acknowledge the leverage that gave me. Worse yet, I'd been footing the bill for their infrastructure while they fined me for maintaining it. Their own budget had zero funds set aside for the road because they'd been freeloading on my inheritance for decades. That night, I made a choice. I could have slammed down the hammer immediately, put up private road, no trespassing signs, blocked access, and forced people to pay. But that's not who I am. My goal wasn't revenge, it was fairness. My plan was to educate the residents on the true ownership structure, present a reasonable agreement, and only resort to restrictions if the harassment continued. I hired a surveyor to mark the road boundaries, ordered professional signage declaring its private status, and even spoke with a traffic attorney about proper legal procedures. If I was going to assert my rights, I was going to do it properly. The real turning point for me was understanding that I had the power to protect my neighbors from Patty's bullying. Whether it was Mrs. Chen's rose garden, the veteran's flag, or all the petty fines she'd handed out, her authority crumbled the moment she lost control over the road. I had gone from being a target of harassment to the one holding the key to the entire neighborhood, and I knew this power came with responsibility. So, I resolved to wield it wisely. That following week felt like gearing up for the single most important presentation of my life. My lawyer carefully explained the full scope of rights and duties that come with owning a private road. I had the authority to install official signage, set hours of access, limit certain vehicles, and collect fees for upkeep. The one limitation was that I couldn't cut off existing residents without giving proper legal notice. To make sure everything was airtight, I brought in a licensed surveyor to mark the exact property lines. In a situation like this, every inch counted if the matter ended up in court. Watching him operate his electronic instruments, measuring, scanning, and beeping while neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, felt like preparing for battle with scientific precision. I also hired a traffic engineer who spent 3 days at the road entrance, tallying every passing car with one of those handheld click counters. The constant click-click-click became the rhythm of our data collection. His calculations showed that a $50 monthly fee per household would easily cover professional maintenance, snow plowing, and emergency repairs. Emma quickly became my ace in the hole for community outreach. She launched a Facebook group called Fair Whole Governance and began compiling a timeline of Patty's harassment, complete with photos and screenshots. My daughter has this natural ability to make complicated legal points sound simple, and her posts drew in supporters I hadn't realized were on my side. "Dad, look at this," she said, turning her laptop toward me, filled with comments. Mrs. Peterson wrote that Patty fined her over incorrect mailbox numbers. Mer. Garcia complained that his kids' chalk art on their driveway had earned him a citation. She's completely unhinged, Emma muttered. Meanwhile, I put together an educational presentation on the road's ownership history. Using maps, old photos, and in facts section, I laid out the facts clearly. My engineering background helped me break technical details into plain language. I emphasized this wasn't about revenge or squeezing money out of neighbors. It was about ending the constant harassment and building a fair, sustainable solution. The numbers spoke for themselves. 4 years. I'd effectively been subsidizing neighborhood infrastructure at a cost of roughly $150 per household each month. My proposed $50 fee was, in reality, a bargain when compared to standard whole road assessments. Mrs. Chen introduced me to longtime residents who had also endured Patty's heavy-handed tactics. Tom, a contractor, volunteered to pitch in materials and labor. The attorney continued to guide me through legal channels. And the traffic engineer even offered to testify if things escalated. I thought through every possible outcome. If education didn't work, I'd roll out formal usage agreements. If the harassment continued, I'd restrict access during certain hours. If Patty tried legal intimidation, I'd countersue for harassment and defamation. And if all else failed, I had the nuclear option, closing the road entirely. Though that would require coordination with emergency services. Here's a useful tip that might save others money. Properly structured private road cooperatives can qualify for tax benefits. Shared maintenance costs may be deductible in certain cases, which can motivate neighbors to agree on fair solutions instead of dragging disputes into court. Timing was everything. I decided to wait for Patty's next move before revealing my full strategy. That way, the impact would be stronger, and residents would clearly see the contrast between her authoritarian style and my cooperative proposal. I trained myself to remain composed. Anticipating that Patty would try to provoke me, my focus had to stay on solutions, not finger-pointing. I also prepared mentally for the fact that conflict was unavoidable. Patty had built her identity on controlling people, and surrendering that power wouldn't come easily. But I also allowed myself to hope maybe this fight could actually heal the neighborhood. If we could create a transparent and fair system for maintaining the road, it might become a blueprint for managing other shared expenses. Maybe, just maybe, we could restore some of the community spirit that Mrs. Chen remembered from the early days. By Thursday, the surveyor had completed his work, planting flags every 50 feet along the property line, the sharp scent of spray paint marking the boundaries mixed with the sweet fragrance of honeysuckle from Mrs. Chen's garden, a strange blend of legal precision and natural beauty. By Friday morning, I had brand new signs ready to install. Private road owned by Morrison Development LLC, authorized access only, usage agreements required. I decided not to install the signs right away. Instead, I wanted to give diplomacy one final shot. After all, when you're holding all the cards, sometimes the smartest move is to wait and let your opponent walk straight into their own mistake. Patty didn't make me wait long. By Monday morning, there was a sheriff's sale notice taped to my front door, the oversized sheet of legal paper rustling menacingly in the breeze. She was actually trying to auction off my home to collect her bogus fines. Her arrogance hit a new level. Patty even contacted the local news, bragging about her victory over the so-called problem resident and calling a press conference to celebrate her so-called enforcement success. She was so intoxicated by her false sense of authority that she was broadcasting her abuse of power to the entire county. I stayed silent. Publicly, I carried on as usual while privately preparing my final play. My attorney immediately filed a motion to dismiss the lien, reminding everyone that you can't just invent debts and force a property sale without a court order. Still, I didn't go public with that win yet. The survey stakes were still planted along the road like warning flags, and the private road sign sat in my garage, waiting. I wanted Patty fully committed to her reckless course before showing my hand. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was starting to split apart. One by one, neighbors came to me quietly with apologies and their own stories. Garcia admitted Patty had threatened him over his children's chalk drawings on their driveway. Mrs. Peterson confided that she'd been cited for mailbox numbers that had been unchanged for over 15 years. She whispered to me at the grocery store, nervously glancing down the hall as if Patty might be eavesdropping behind the cereal boxes. "She's lost it," she said. "But we're all afraid to speak out. She goes after anyone who crosses her." Then came the twist that revealed just how desperate Patty had become. Thanks to Emma's online sleuthing, we discovered that Patty's husband, Richard, was under an ethics investigation. His law practice was accused of gouging whole clients and cutting shady deals with preferred contractors, the same emergency repair rules that required expensive, approved vendors. Richard's firm was profiting from them. Inflated fines and legal threats, more billable hours funneled to his office. Patty was using her whole presidency as a pipeline for Richard's income, a blatant conflict of interest. But I kept that card in my back pocket. Sometimes the strongest weapon is the one you don't reveal right away. Her media push crumbled quickly. In her TV interview about protecting property values, she came off as petty and vindictive, especially while standing beside the freshly repaired road I had personally funded. Local business owners started reaching out to back me up. They'd seen the same abuse of power in city councils and permitting offices. Tom, the contractor, offered to rally fellow tradesmen for future roadwork. A restaurant owner even volunteered to cater our next community meeting. The online battle escalated too. Emma's Fair Whole governance group ballooned to over 200 members, including residents from other neighborhoods eager to share their whole nightmares. Patty's supporters tried launching their own property standards protection group, but their posts only made them look unreasonable. Then Patty crossed the line. She circulated a petition to have me removed as the problem resident and started spreading lies about my personal life and finances. She told people I was laundering money through bogus road work and claimed I was behind on my mortgage. That smear campaign was the breaking point. Petty fines were one thing, but attacking my character with lies took it to another level. That Friday evening, I made my move. I sent a short, direct email to every household in the neighborhood. Community meeting Sunday, 2 p.m. Important information about road ownership. No details. No threats. Just a date, a time, and the promise of truth. It was nothing more than a straightforward, calm invitation to hear the truth. Patty, of course, retaliated by setting up her own rival meeting at the exact same time, branding it an emergency session against the problem resident. She even went as far as inviting county officials and local reporters, clearly hoping to see me humiliated or even arrested on whatever trumped-up charges she could imagine. Everything was building toward a final showdown. I had my lawyer on standby, the surveyor prepared with boundary records, and a file bursting with evidence of Patty's harassment along with her husband's ethics mess. But my real ace was the deed to the road tucked in my briefcase, along with official road signs waiting to be installed once I was ready to bring the charade to an end. Sunday promised to be unforgettable. This time, Patty wouldn't get to control the story. The day arrived with that sharp autumn air that makes events feel fated. Both gatherings were set for 2 p.m. At the community center, Patty's so-called emergency meeting versus my simple notice about road ownership. I got there half an hour early with my attorney, the surveyor, and my stack of documents. The parking lot was already filling, neighbors visibly aligning themselves by which door they walked through. You could practically slice the tension with one of the survey stakes. Patty had gone all out. She'd set up a projector, summoned the Channel 7 crew again, and even managed to drag in a code enforcement officer and a sheriff's deputy, obviously aiming to see me carted off or publicly shamed on live TV. Inside, the place was packed, over 60 people, the largest turnout in the neighborhood's history. Patty was at the podium, already in performance mode when I entered. Her PowerPoint, titled "Protecting Our Community from Fraudulent Residents," was nothing short of a spectacle. For 20 minutes, she ranted about my illegal road work, paraded blown-up photos of my repairs, and insisted my actions endangered everyone's property values. She even brought props, a ruler for measuring grass, plus printed violations she'd fabricated. At one point, she jabbed her finger at me as if I were some kind of criminal, declaring that today the community would vote to ban me from common areas and pursue charges for fraud and property damage. The applause was then and uneasy. You could feel the mood shifting as people realized how absurd her performance had become. When she finally wrapped up, she smugly offered me the floor, no doubt expecting I'd beg for leniency. Instead, I walked up calmly, set the surveyor's boundary map on the table, and spoke clearly. Before we get into supposed road violations, let's establish who actually owns the road. That was the twist that changed everything. I unfolded the original deed and inheritance papers, proving that Maple Grove Lane was never public. It was private property I had inherited from my uncle, the subdivision's developer. For years, every single resident, including Patty, had been using my road without paying a dime. While I personally covered all maintenance costs and got fined for improving my own land, the county official examined the deed. The surveyor confirmed the boundaries. The deputy's expression soured as he realized he'd been dragged into a civil dispute he had no jurisdiction over. Patty's reaction was pure panic. She shouted that my documents were forged, that I was orchestrating some elaborate scam, and demanded the county investigate me. But you could see in her face she knew it was over. I laid out one final, reasonable solution: create a cooperative where residents contributed modest monthly fees for professional upkeep. I'd keep ownership but ensure full transparency and community input. That's when Patty truly unraveled. She refused outright, screeching that I was blackmailing the community and threatening lawsuits against anyone who agreed to my extortion scheme. Yes, she actually called it extortion to suggest that people help fund maintenance of the road they all relied on. When it became clear no one was buying her theatrics, she stormed out with her die-hard supporters, shouting that this wasn't finished and vowing to take her crusade to the state attorney general. The slam of the door behind her echoed like the closing chapter of a long, ridiculous war. Immediately, Mrs. Chen stood up to rally the level-headed neighbors who wanted to discuss the cooperative idea. By the end of the meeting, around 35 households expressed serious interest. The county representative confirmed that all my paperwork was legally sound and recommended that we resolve the finer details privately. Afterward, the news crew interviewed both sides. Patty's on-camera tirade about fraudulent residency and property theft only made her appearance stable, while my calm explanation of inheritance rights and a fair cost-sharing plan came across as measured and reasonable. That night, the coverage spread quickly across local social media. Dozens of residents shared their own whole nightmare stories and voiced support for my proposal, with many calling it a fair, practical solution. But the true victory wasn't online. It was seeing neighbors actually conversing with one another as they left the meeting, no longer hiding behind curtains or avoiding eye contact. For the first time in months, Willowbrook Estates felt like a neighborhood instead of a battlefield. I thought Sunday had closed the book on the ordeal, but Patty wasn't finished. She set a deadline for Friday at 5 p.m., demanding that I retract my fraudulent claims or face full legal consequences. It was clear she was gearing up for one last showdown. That Friday evening, I pulled into the community center parking lot with my lawyer, the surveyor, and a stack of professional Morrison Development LLC private road signs ready to be installed. The sun was dipping low, stretching shadows across the pavement as both sides gathered for what everyone sensed would be the final confrontation. Patty had billed the event as a Save Our Neighborhood rally. Her followers held handmade posters with slogans like "Stop the Road Bully" and "Protect Our Rights." She even brought along her husband Richard and 3 of his attorney colleagues, clearly hoping their presence would intimidate me into surrendering. Channel 7 was back again, joined this time by a county newspaper reporter drawn by the viral buzz. A sheriff's deputy had also been assigned to keep the peace. Though his expression suggested he'd much rather be somewhere dealing with real crimes, Mrs. Chin, our neighborhood's unofficial elder stateswoman, took it upon herself to open the discussion. Her familiar jasmine perfume lingering in the cool fall air heavy with tension. I laid out my road cooperative proposal one last time: $50 per household each month, covering professional upkeep, transparent financial reporting, community input on major projects. and a guaranteed 5-year rate freeze. Compared with standard Ho assessments, it was a steal. Patty's rebuttal was pure performance. She dismissed my ownership as a mere legal technicality, claiming that decades of use gave the community permanent rights to the road. Her voice rose to a near shriek as she accused me of extorting honest families. Pointing at me as though I were some kind of criminal, she declared, "This man is holding our entire neighborhood hostage, forcing us to pay him just to drive to our own homes." That's when Tom, the contractor, stepped forward and dropped a dose of reality. He broke down the true costs of road work, showed photos of the crumbling pavement before my repairs, and calculated just how much money I'd saved the community over the years. "Jake's been footing the bill for everyone here," Tom said, his words carrying the weight of someone who actually understood construction. "That road would have cost 50 grand to repair properly. He did it for 3,000 and asked for nothing. I then sweetened my proposal, lowering the fee to $40 per month and throwing in winter snow removal. Everyone has until Sunday to decide." I said, "After that, I'll be installing private road signs. And vehicle access will require usage agreements." Patty, unwilling to concede, tried to unleash her final weapon. She announced that anyone who signed my extortion contract would be sued personally for conspiracy to commit fraud. She even boasted that she had plans to build an alternate access road, so the community wouldn't need my criminal highway. That's when the county official, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "Mum, no such easements exist. All surrounding land is privately owned with no right-of-way allowances. The cost of construction would exceed $1 million, require multiple environmental permits, and take at least 3 to 5 years. The cameras caught every second as Patty's face cycled through half a dozen shades of red. She doubled down anyway, screaming, "I don't care what it costs, we will not be held hostage by this fraud." That was my moment. I stood tall and said evenly, "Mrs. Hendress, for 6 months you've fined me for maintaining my own property while your husband's law firm collected fees from every Ho enforcement action. You've bullied elderly residents, targeted families with children, and turned this neighborhood into a war zone. The only fraud here is your abuse of power." The room went dead silent. Even the news cameras seemed to zoom in more closely as I delivered my final point. "I'm proposing a fair system that helps everyone. But if you'd rather spend $2 million building a new road just to avoid paying $40 a month, that's your choice. Just keep in mind, you'd still need to cross my property to reach your construction site." The vote happened quickly and left little doubt. 35 households backed the cooperative, 8 remained undecided, and only Patty's core group of 6 opposed it outright. By Saturday morning, I installed the professional signage, "Private road authorized access only." The signs went up at both entrances of Maple Grove Lane, with a clear 30-day grace period for residents to finalize usage agreements. Patty made one last desperate attempt, trying to rally neighbors to tear down the signs and calling the police to accuse me of vandalizing public property. The responding deputy glanced at my ownership paperwork and calmly explained that I had every legal right to mark my own land. That weekend's media coverage painted a stark contrast: a reasonable property owner offering practical solutions versus a frantic woman demanding the impossible. Public opinion overwhelmingly sided with me. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates is unrecognizable. The Maple Grove Road Cooperative is now officially incorporated, with 37 households paying their monthly contributions through an easy online system. The road is in the best condition it's ever been, professionally maintained, with proper drainage and even decorative landscaping along the edges. Patty's reign ended exactly as expected. 3 weeks after our showdown, she was voted out in an emergency Ho election. Once fear of retaliation vanished, people chose rational leadership. Meanwhile, Richard's law firm collapsed after the county ethics probe confirmed years of overbilling and kickback schemes. Within 6 months, the family quietly listed their home and moved out of state. The ripple effects have been remarkable. I now get emails from homeowners nationwide who face similar Ho harassment, all asking for advice. The local news ran a follow-up feature on Ho reform, and the county is actively considering new oversight rules for associations. Our case has even been cited in 3 separate property rights lawsuits as proof that private road cooperatives can succeed. But the most meaningful change is closer to home. Mrs. Chen's rose garden is flourishing again, and without fear of fines. She even started a neighborhood welcome committee that genuinely greets new residents instead of intimidating them. Our annual road maintenance meeting has turned into a community gathering where people plan block parties and coordinate childcare swaps. Property values have risen by an average of $12,000 per home since we implemented professional upkeep. The cooperative now has a healthy reserve fund for future repairs. And everyone saves money compared to typical HOA fees with full transparency and no shady administrative charges. The biggest transformation, though, isn't financial, it's psychological. Neighbors wave at each other again. Children play in the street without parents worrying about citation letters. Willowbrook Estates finally feels like a neighborhood instead of a battlefield. The Facebook group Emma started has transformed into a hub for real community projects that make a difference. I never set out to be any kind of activist, but this journey showed me that sometimes regular people have no choice but to confront bullies even when it's uncomfortable. I learned the value of documentation, persistence, and building alliances. Most importantly, I discovered that standing your ground on principle can spark real change when you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. Out of the cooperative surplus, we established the Fair HOA Advocacy Fund, which now provides legal support for homeowners facing abuse. It also partners with the local legal aid society to host workshops on property rights. Inspired by our model, 3 nearby communities have launched their own cooperatives. The legal precedent from our case has helped other private road conflicts settle through mediation instead of coastal. Why court battles? Even county officials updated subdivision rules to mandate clearer disclosures about private road ownership. And whole management companies have started training boards on transparency and residents' rights. But the part I'm proudest of is watching Emma, now a freshman studying public policy, carry this experience into her education. She's written academic papers on grassroots organizing and citizen resistance to institutional abuse, crediting our road war as the spark for her career path. Just last week, I got a call from a homeowner in the next county. Their HOA is tangled in a shady pool maintenance monopoly where board members profit from inflated contracts, leaving residents stuck with massive special assessments. I'm meeting with them soon to share the strategies and cooperative model that worked for us. Next month is our annual road maintenance meeting, and Mrs. Chen is turning it into a neighborhood potluck. Tom, the contractor, has offered to donate supplies for stonework at the entrance, and the cooperative voted to add bike lanes and improved lighting. We're even planning a small fall festival to mark our 2nd anniversary. This neighbor's cooperating instead of controlling, choosing transparency over corruption, and fairness over fear is what real community looks like. So here's my challenge to you. If you're facing HOA abuse, petty dictators, or anyone misusing power to make your life miserable, fight back. Document everything. Know your rights. Build alliances. Don't let intimidation win. Share your own whole nightmare in the comments, and let's create a network of people who refuse to be bullied by power-hungry neighbors. And if you want more stories of ordinary people standing up to institutions that overreach, hit subscribe. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply refusing to play the victim.